I never thought a stack of firewood would turn my peaceful life in Asheville, North Carolina into a full-blown war with the homeowner association. But here we are, and I am absolutely done playing nice. My name is Lucas Anderson, and I have been living in the Pine Ridge community for nearly 8 years. I bought my 3-acre property specifically because I wanted space, privacy, and the freedom to live how I wanted. The neighborhood sits just outside Asheville proper, nestled against the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the winters get cold enough that a good supply of firewood is not just a luxury but a necessity. When I moved in, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. The dues were manageable, the rules made sense, and everyone mostly kept to themselves. That all changed about 2 years ago when Patricia Jenkins moved into the neighborhood and somehow talked her way onto the HOA board within 6 months. Patricia was everything you would expect from someone who makes being in everyone's business their full-time job. She was in her late 40s, always wore pearl earrings even when checking her mailbox, and had that particular haircut that seemed to defy both gravity and common sense. Within weeks of joining the board, she started issuing violation notices for things that had never been problems before. Someone's trash can was visible from the street on a non-collection day. A neighbor's Christmas lights stayed up until January 2nd. Another family got cited because their dog barked during what Patricia deemed quiet hours, which apparently she just made up on the spot. I mostly avoided her radar until last September. I had spent the better part of 3 weekends splitting and stacking firewood for the winter. I take pride in my work, and my woodpile was a thing of beauty. I had stacked it along the side of my property, about 30 feet from the road, behind a nice section of my fence. The stack was maybe 7 feet tall, neatly arranged with good airflow between the logs for proper seasoning. I had even built a small roof over it to keep the rain off. It was functional, organized, and completely on my property. On a Tuesday morning in late September, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address showed it was from the Pine Ridge HOA. I opened it right there by the mailbox, and my blood pressure immediately spiked. The letter, signed by Patricia Jenkins as HOA president, informed me that I was in violation of Section 7.3.2 of the Community Guidelines, which apparently stated that stored materials including but not limited to firewood, building supplies, and outdoor equipment must not exceed 5 feet in height when visible from any community roadway or neighboring property. I read that sentence 3 times, feeling my jaw clench tighter with each pass. 5 feet. My woodpile was 7 feet tall, sure, but it was behind my fence and barely visible from the road. You would have to actively look for it to even notice it was there. The letter went on to inform me that I had been fined $500 and had 10 days to either reduce the height of my woodpile or move it to a location where it would not be visible from any roadway. I immediately pulled out my copy of the HOA guidelines. I kept them in my truck because Patricia had made them necessary reading for anyone who wanted to avoid her wrath. I flipped through to Section 7.3.2 and found the passage she had quoted. But as I read the full section, I noticed something interesting. The section specifically mentioned materials stored in front yards or side yards adjacent to primary roadways. My woodpile was on the side of my property that faced a small access road used mainly by utility vehicles and the occasional resident taking a shortcut. It was hardly a primary roadway. I decided to handle this professionally. I called the HOA office and asked to schedule a meeting with Patricia to discuss the violation. The secretary, a kind woman named Mary who had lived in Pine Ridge longer than anyone, sighed when I told her what the meeting was about. "Another firewood complaint," she said quietly. You are the third one this month, Lucas. Third? I asked. Who else got hit with this? I probably should not say, but Tom Richardson and the Martins both got cited. Tom moved his wood behind his garage, and the Martins just paid the fine because they did not want the hassle. I thanked Mary and confirmed my meeting for Thursday afternoon. I spent the next 2 days documenting everything. I took photos of my woodpile from every angle. I measured the exact distance from the road. I reviewed the HOA guidelines with a fine-tooth comb and even consulted with my buddy Derek, who happened to be a real estate attorney. Derek laughed when I told him about the fine. Let me guess, Patricia Jenkins. How did you know? She tried the same thing with old man Henderson last year over his garden shed. The woman has way too much time on her hands. He looked over my photos and the guidelines. You have got a solid case here, Lucas. That access road does not qualify as a primary roadway under any reasonable interpretation, and your woodpile is clearly behind your fence line. But be prepared. Patricia does not like being challenged. Thursday afternoon arrived, and I drove to the clubhouse for my meeting. The Pine Ridge Clubhouse was actually a nice facility, something I will admit even in the midst of all this frustration. It was a 2-story building with a large common area, a kitchen, several meeting rooms, and a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The HOA held their meetings there, and residents could reserve it for events. During the winter, they kept the fireplace going pretty much constantly, creating a warm gathering space for the community. Patricia was waiting in one of the meeting rooms, sitting behind a table like she was holding court. She had a folder in front of her, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and that expression of practiced disappointment that suggested she had already decided I was wasting her time. Mr. Anderson, she said as I entered, please sit down. I sat across from her and placed my own folder on the table. Thanks for meeting with me, Patricia. I wanted to discuss this violation notice I received. It is quite straightforward, she said, not looking up from whatever paperwork she was reviewing. Your firewood is stacked too high. You need to comply with the guidelines. I read the guidelines, I replied, keeping my voice level. Section 7.3.2 specifically refers to materials stored adjacent to primary roadways. The access road by my property is not a primary roadway. Patricia finally looked up at me, and I could see the annoyance flash across her face. That is your interpretation. The board has determined that all roadways within the community fall under this guideline. Can I see where the board made that determination? I asked. Is there meeting minutes or an official amendment to the guidelines? Her jaw tightened. Mr. Anderson, I did not bring you here to argue semantics. The rules exist for a reason. They maintain property values and the aesthetic quality of our neighborhood. My woodpile is neat, well-maintained, and behind my fence, I countered. I am not sure how that is affecting anyone's property values. That is not for you to decide, Patricia said sharply. The violation stands. You have 10 days to comply or the fine increases to $1,000. I took a breath, trying to maintain my composure. What if I contest this through the official HOA dispute process? Patricia actually smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. You are certainly welcome to do that. The next board meeting is in 6 weeks. You can present your case then. Of course, the fines will continue to accumulate during that time. It was a trap, and not even a subtle one. By the time I could officially contest the violation, I would have racked up thousands in fines. I could pay them, and then try to get reimbursed if I won my case, but knowing Patricia, that reimbursement would be tied up in red tape for months. I left that meeting furious. I drove home, looked at my beautiful woodpile, and seriously considered just cutting it down to 5 feet. But something in me rebelled against giving Patricia that satisfaction. This was not about firewood anymore. It was about principle. That evening, I was splitting some more wood to blow off steam when my neighbor Jim walked over. Jim was a retired firefighter in his 60s, a good guy who had lived in Pine Ridge even longer than I had. "Heard you had a run-in with Patricia," he said, grabbing a log and setting it up for me. "News travels fast," I replied, bringing the axe down hard. "Mary might have mentioned something." Jim grinned. "For what it is worth, I think your woodpile looks fine, better than that eyesore of a decorative fountain Patricia installed in her front yard last spring." I paused mid-swing. "She installed a fountain?" "Oh yeah, a big one too. Probably 8 feet tall with these awful concrete cherubs. Thing runs 24/7, and you can hear it from 3 houses away. Several people complained, but somehow that did not violate any guidelines." "Interesting," I said, my mind starting to turn. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to the neighborhood. I took walks around Pine Ridge with my camera, documenting various potential violations that seemed to go unsighted. The Hendersons had a satellite dish that was clearly visible from the road. The Patels had a basketball hoop in their driveway that exceeded the height limits mentioned in the same section as the Firewood rule. And Patricia's fountain was not just tall, but also violated the noise ordinance that she herself had pushed through the board last year. But I was not interested in becoming Patricia. I did not want to turn into someone who spent their days looking for violations and harassing neighbors. There had to be a better way to handle this. Then I remembered something. Every winter, I supplied firewood to the clubhouse. It had started informally about 5 years ago. The HOA had always bought firewood from a commercial supplier out of Hendersonville, paying premium prices for wood that was often not properly seasoned. One year, the delivery did not show up until December, and they had to run the first few community events without the fireplace going. I had mentioned to Mary that I had plenty of wood and would be happy to supply the clubhouse. She had been grateful, and it became an unofficial arrangement. I provided 10 to 12 cords of wood each winter, all properly split and seasoned. The HOA paid me a fair price, less than they had been paying the commercial supplier, but more than enough to cover my costs. It was good wood too, mostly oak and hickory that I harvested from fallen trees on my property, and a few neighboring lots whose owners were happy to have someone clear the deadfall. The fireplace in the clubhouse burned through a lot of wood during the winter months, especially during the popular Friday evening socials and the various holiday events. I called Mary at the HOA office. "Hey Mary, I need to give notice about something. I will not be able to supply firewood to the clubhouse this winter." There was a long pause. "Oh no, Lucas, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I assured her. "I just have some concerns about storing large quantities of firewood on my property given the recent interpretation of the HOA guidelines. I would not want to risk additional violations or fines." "I understand," Mary said quietly. "This is about Patricia's citation, is it not?" "I just want to make sure I am in full compliance with all HOA rules," I replied diplomatically. "She is not going to like this," Mary said. "That is not really my concern anymore," I replied. I sent an official email to the HOA board that afternoon, copying all 5 members. I explained that due to recent clarifications regarding firewood storage heights, I would be unable to maintain sufficient inventory to supply the clubhouse this winter. I wished them well in finding an alternative supplier, and thanked them for the opportunity to serve the community over the past 5 years. The response was immediate. 3 board members replied within an hour, all expressing disappointment and hoping we could work something out. Patricia's response came an hour later. It was terse and professional, thanking me for the notice and assuring me that the HOA would have no trouble finding a replacement supplier. I waited. The first Friday evening social was scheduled for late October, just 3 weeks away. These events were popular, especially with the older residents who enjoyed gathering in the warm clubhouse as the weather turned cold. The fireplace was central to the whole atmosphere. 2 weeks before the event, I ran into Mary at the grocery store. She looked stressed. "Everything okay?" I asked. She sighed heavily. "We are having trouble finding a firewood supplier. The company we used to use is booked solid through December now. They have expanded their client base and do not have capacity for us anymore. Patricia has been calling around, but everyone is either too expensive or cannot deliver on our timeline." "That is tough," I said sympathetically. "What about buying it retail, like from the gas station bundles?" Mary actually laughed. "Do you know how much wood that fireplace goes through during one of our Friday events? We would need probably 50 of those little bundles. It would cost a fortune." I wished her luck and meant it. I did not want the community events to fail. I just wanted Patricia to realize that her arbitrary enforcement of rules had consequences. The Friday social happened without the fireplace going. I heard about it from Jim, who had attended. It was sad, Lucas. The room felt empty without the fire. A bunch of people left early because it was actually kind of cold. Patricia tried to play it off, said something about giving the chimney maintenance, but everyone knew the real issue. The following week, I received a call from board member Richard Torres. Richard was a reasonable guy, an engineer who had lived in Pine Ridge for about 10 years. "Lucas, can we talk? Off the record?" "Sure, Richard. What is up?" "This firewood situation. I know what happened with Patricia and your woodpile. I voted against that citation, for the record. So did Jennifer and Mark. We were outvoted." "I appreciate that," I said. "Look, the community really values what you have been doing with the firewood supply. Is there any way we can work something out? What if we got the board to rescind the violation?" I thought about it. "Richard, I appreciate you reaching out. But here is the thing. It is not just about my violation anymore. Patricia has been using that guideline as a weapon. The Martins, Tom Richardson, me. How many others are we going to cite before someone says this is ridiculous? And how am I supposed to supply the clubhouse when I am not allowed to maintain sufficient inventory on my property?" "You make a fair point," Richard admitted. "What if we amended the guidelines, made an exception for firewood stored behind fencing?" "That would be a start," I said. "But I would need to see it in writing and officially passed by the board before I could commit to anything." "I will see what I can do," Richard promised. 2 days later, Patricia showed up at my house. I was working in my garage when her silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. She got out, wearing what looked like a designer jacket, and approached with a smile that did not quite work. "Lucas, do you have a moment?" she asked. "What can I do for you, Patricia?" I replied, not stopping my work. "I wanted to discuss this misunderstanding about the firewood situation." "I was not aware there was a misunderstanding," I said. "You sent me a violation notice. I am complying by reducing my firewood storage, which means I cannot supply the clubhouse. Seems pretty straightforward." Her smile faltered. "There is no need to be difficult about this. Perhaps we can work out an arrangement. I may have been overly zealous about the height restriction." "May have been. Fine," she said sharply. "The violation was perhaps not warranted in your specific case. Will you resume supplying the clubhouse?" "Just like that?" I asked. "Do I still owe the $500 fine?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "We can waive that. And what about future violations? How do I know that next month you will not decide my woodpile is too close to the road or too wide, or violates some other guideline you decide to reinterpret. You are being unreasonable, Patricia snapped, her professional demeanor cracking. I am being cautious, I corrected. You created this situation, Patricia. You decided that enforcing a questionable interpretation of an HOA guideline was more important than community relationships. Now you are dealing with the consequences. The board will hear about this, she threatened. I have already spoken with Richard, I replied calmly. Feel free to tell them whatever you want. Patricia left in a huff, her Mercedes kicking up gravel as she backed out too quickly. I went back to my work, feeling both satisfied and a little guilty. I really did not want to hurt the community. But I also was not going to let Patricia bully me into submission. The next board meeting was scheduled for early November. Richard had called me a few days before to let me know that my situation was on the agenda. We are going to discuss the firewood storage guidelines, he said. I think you should be there. I showed up to find the meeting room more packed than usual. Word had gotten around about the firewood issue, and apparently a lot of residents had opinions. I recognized Tom Richardson and the Martins. Jim was there too, along with at least 20 other homeowners. Patricia called the meeting to order, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the crowd. They went through the usual business first, approval of previous minutes, financial reports, and a discussion about holiday decorating guidelines. Then they reached the firewood item. Before we begin, Patricia said stiffly, I want to note that this discussion is about community guidelines, not personal grievances. Richard cleared his throat. The board has received several inquiries about Section 7.3.2 and its application to firewood storage. Given that we have a number of residents who heat with wood and the community benefits from local firewood supply, I have proposed an amendment to clarify the guidelines. He read his proposal. It was reasonable and well thought out. Firewood could be stored up to 8 feet in height if it was behind fencing or otherwise screened from primary view. Storage areas had to be maintained in a neat and organized manner. The definition of primary roadways was clearly spelled out, excluding service access roads and private drives. This is ridiculous, Patricia interjected. We have guidelines for a reason. If we start making exceptions for everyone, the entire community will turn into a chaotic mess. Tom Richardson stood up. Patricia, with all due respect, most of us moved here because we wanted some space and freedom. These guidelines were supposed to maintain basic standards, not micromanage every aspect of our properties. Several residents voiced agreement. Jennifer Park, another board member, spoke up. I think Richard's amendment strikes a good balance. It maintains aesthetic standards while allowing residents reasonable use of their properties. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Patricia fought hard against the amendment, but it was clear she was losing. Several residents brought up other questionable violations that Patricia had issued over the past year. Mrs. Henderson mentioned the fountain, which got a lot of knowing nods from the crowd. When they finally called for a vote, the amendment passed 4-1. Only Patricia voted against it. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me. We have been waiting for someone to stand up to her, one resident said. She has made living here more stressful than it needs to be. Richard pulled me aside. So, any chance you will reconsider supplying the clubhouse? Let me get the amendment in writing, I said. And I want confirmation that my previous fine is officially waived. I will have Mary send you everything tomorrow, Richard promised. The next morning, true to his word, Richard had Mary email me the official documentation. The amendment had been added to the HOA guidelines, complete with specific language that grandfathered in existing woodpiles that met the new criteria. My fine had been officially waived with a note in the system that the original violation had been issued in error. I called Mary. "Okay, I am back in business. How much wood do you need?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh, Lucas, thank you. We have 3 events scheduled for November and 4 in December. Can you supply enough for all of them? I will make it work," I promised. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked my tail off processing firewood. I cut, split, and stacked enough wood to get the clubhouse through the season. I even enlisted Jim to help with delivery, and he was happy to assist. The first Friday social with the fireplace going again was apparently a huge success. Mary sent me a thank you email with photos. The massive stone fireplace was roaring, and the room was packed with happy residents enjoying the warmth and ambience. But Patricia was not done, not by a long shot. About 2 weeks after the board meeting, I received another notice. This time it was about my truck. Apparently, parking commercial vehicles in residential driveways overnight violated Section 4.2.1 of the guidelines. My truck, which I used for hauling firewood and had my small tree service logo on the door, was now classified as a commercial vehicle. I could not believe it. I called Richard immediately. "She is at it again." Richard sighed. "I saw the notice she sent you. Lucas, I am sorry. She is furious about losing the firewood vote and is taking it out on you. Can she just make up violations like this? I have been parking my truck here for 8 years. Technically, the guideline does exist," Richard admitted. "But it was intended for things like large commercial trucks, delivery vehicles, that sort of thing. Not personal trucks with small business logos. Let me talk to the other board members." This time, the response was faster. Within 3 days, the board held an emergency meeting and passed a clarification that vehicles under a certain size with business logos were permitted as long as they were primarily personal vehicles. They also added language about frivolous or retaliatory violations, with potential removal from the board for members who abused their authority. Patricia was livid. At the next board meeting, she announced she was stepping down as president, though she would remain on the board. Richard was elected as the new president, and the mood in the room was noticeably more relaxed. I thought that was the end of it. Winter arrived in full force, and I stayed busy keeping the clubhouse supplied with firewood. The community events were thriving, and I was getting a lot of positive feedback from residents who appreciated having the fireplace going again. Then January hit, and everything got weird. I was delivering a load of wood to the clubhouse on a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed Patricia's car in the parking lot. That was not unusual since she was still on the board and often stopped by for various reasons. What was unusual was seeing her loading something from the clubhouse storage room into her trunk. I did not think much of it at first. Maybe she was taking home decorations from a recent event or organizing supplies. But when I went to stack the wood in the storage area, I noticed something off. We kept careful inventory of the firewood because the HOA paid me based on delivery amounts. Mary had a clipboard where she tracked every delivery. According to the log, I had delivered 5 cords of wood since November, but looking at what was actually there, it seemed low. Really low. I mentioned it to Mary the next day. "Hey, the wood inventory seems off. Have you been burning a lot more than usual?" Mary pulled out her records. "Actually, we have been using less this year. The new programmable thermostat is helping keep the main room warmer, so we are not relying on the fireplace as much." "Why do you ask?" "The storage area just seems emptier than it should," I said carefully. Mary frowned. "Let me check something." She went to the storage area and did a quick count. When she came back, she looked concerned. "Lucas, you are right. We should have at least half a cord more than what is there." "Has anyone else been taking wood?" I asked. Not that I know of, Mary said slowly. I am the only one who is supposed to access that storage area besides Richard. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept a closer eye on things. I started marking the wood in a way that was not obvious but that I would recognize. I used a small drill to make a distinctive pattern of holes on the ends of certain logs, hidden where you would not see them unless you were looking. Sure enough, the marked wood started disappearing, and I was pretty sure I knew where it was going. I did not want to make accusations without proof, so I did something that felt a little intrusive but necessary. I set up a trail camera in the storage area, hidden among some boxes, pointing at the wood stack. I cleared it with Richard first, explaining my concerns. "You think someone is stealing the firewood?" Richard asked. "I think wood is going missing," I said carefully. "I want to know where." The camera caught her on the 3rd day. Patricia, clear as day, loading wood from the clubhouse storage into a large canvas bag and carrying it to her car. The timestamp showed it was 2 p.m. on a Thursday, a time when she knew Mary would be at lunch. I showed the footage to Richard. He watched it twice, his expression growing darker. "I cannot believe this. She has been stealing from the HOA. Looks like it," I said. "The question is, how much and for how long?" Richard called an emergency board meeting. He did not tell Patricia what it was about, just that they needed to discuss a security matter. I was asked to attend as well. When Patricia walked into the meeting room and saw me there with my laptop, her face went pale. "What is this about?" she demanded. Richard did not waste time. "Patricia, we have evidence that firewood purchased by the HOA for the clubhouse has been removed without authorization. Do you know anything about that?" "I have no idea what you are talking about," Patricia said, but her voice was shaky. I turned my laptop around and played the footage. Patricia watched herself on the screen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "That is," she started, then stopped. "I was just borrowing a little bit. I was going to replace it." "Borrowing," Richard repeated. "Patricia, this is HOA property. You have been taking it for personal use without authorization and without payment." "It is just firewood," Patricia snapped, some of her usual fire returning. "This is ridiculous. You are going to make a big deal out of a few logs. Based on Lucas's inventory tracking, you have taken approximately a quarter cord of wood over the past 6 weeks, Richard said. "At market rates, that is roughly $200 worth of firewood. That is theft, Patricia." The room went silent. Jennifer Park, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Patricia, you need to resign from the board, effective immediately." "You cannot force me out," Patricia protested. "Actually, we can," Richard said. "The bylaws allow for removal of board members for misuse of HOA resources. You can resign, or we can hold a formal removal hearing with the entire community present." Patricia's face went red. "This is absurd. You are destroying this community. When I joined the board, there were standards. Now you are letting people do whatever they want, and you are attacking me over firewood." "No one is attacking you," Richard said calmly, "but you violated the trust of this community. You used your position on the board to harass residents over minor issues while helping yourself to HOA property. That is not acceptable." Patricia stood up abruptly. "Fine, I resign. This place is going to fall apart without me anyway." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room exhaled collectively. Jennifer looked at me. "Lucas, I am so sorry you got caught up in all of this." "It is okay," I said. "I just want to make sure the firewood situation is resolved." Richard nodded. "We will calculate what was taken and bill Patricia for it. If she refuses to pay, we will pursue it through small claims court. The HOA cannot just let this go." Over the next few weeks, things calmed down considerably. Patricia did pay for the firewood she took, though she did it with a check that arrived with no note or acknowledgement. Mary told me she had stopped attending community events entirely. The board appointed a new member to fill Patricia's vacant seat, a younger guy named Marcus, who had just moved to the neighborhood and worked in nonprofit management. He brought a fresh perspective and a collaborative approach that was a welcome change. I continued supplying firewood through the rest of the winter. The Friday socials were more popular than ever, and I started getting requests from individual residents wanting to buy wood for their own homes. My small side business started growing in ways I had not expected. In March, as winter was winding down, I ran into Patricia at the gas station. She was pumping gas and I pulled up to the pump opposite her. For a moment, I thought about just ignoring her, but something made me walk over. "Hey, Patricia," I said. She looked up, surprised. "Lucas." "Look, I know things got messy," I said, "but I just want you to know I did not start any of this to hurt you. I just wanted to stack my firewood and live my life." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "I know. I let things get out of hand. I thought I was helping the community by enforcing standards, but I realize now I was just being controlling." She paused. "For what it is worth, I am sorry about the violation. Your firewood pile was fine. I was wrong." It was probably the most honest thing she had ever said to me. "I appreciate that," I said. "And for what it is worth, your fountain is actually kind of nice. The cherubs are growing on me." She almost smiled. "They are a bit much, are they not?" We talked for a few more minutes, nothing deep, just small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. When we parted ways, things were not exactly friendly, but they were civil. It felt like enough. Spring arrived, and with it came the annual HOA meeting where they reviewed the previous year and elected board positions. Richard was re-elected as president unanimously. During his address to the community, he talked about the importance of rules that served the community rather than burdening it. He mentioned the Firewood Amendment as an example of how guidelines could be updated to reflect the actual needs and values of residents. "We are a community," Richard said. "That means we work together, respect each other's property and privacy, and focus on what actually matters. It does not mean we micromanage each other's lives." The room applauded, and I found myself feeling genuinely proud to be part of Pine Ridge again. As summer approached, I shifted my focus from firewood to my tree service work. The winter had been good to me financially, and I was able to invest in some better equipment. Word of mouth had spread about my business, and I was staying busy with jobs all around the Asheville area. But I made sure to keep processing firewood throughout the spring and summer. Come next fall, I wanted to be ready to supply the clubhouse again. It had become more than just a side income. It was my contribution to the community, a way of being part of something larger than myself. One afternoon in June, I was working on my property, clearing some fallen branches from a storm the night before, when Jim walked over with a beer in each hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering me one. "You read my mind," I replied, accepting gratefully. We sat on my porch, looking out at the mountains in the distance. The view was one of the reasons I had bought this property in the first place. "You know," Jim said after a while, "when you first stood up to Patricia, I was not sure how it would turn out, thought it might get ugly." "It did get ugly," I pointed out. "True," Jim acknowledged. "But it also made things better. The board is actually functioning now. People feel like they can live their lives without someone looking over their shoulder all the time. You did that." "I just wanted to stack my firewood," I said. Jim laughed. "Yeah, well, sometimes standing up for the small things leads to bigger changes." As autumn approached again, I found myself actually looking forward to the winter season. I had my woodpile stacked high and proper. fully compliant with the amended guidelines, but more importantly, arranged the way I wanted it. The wood was seasoning nicely, and I had already confirmed with Mary about supplying the clubhouse again. The first Friday social of the season was scheduled for late October. I delivered a full cord of wood that afternoon, stacking it neatly in the storage area. Mary was decorating the main room with fall colors, and the place looked warm and inviting. "You are coming tonight, right?" Mary asked. I had not planned on it. I usually just dropped off wood and left. I had not thought about it. "You should," Mary insisted. "You are part of this community too. Plus, Richard wanted to make an announcement, and I think you should be there for it." Curiosity got the better of me, so that evening I cleaned up and headed to the clubhouse. The parking lot was full, and I could see the glow of the fireplace through the windows. Inside, the place was packed with residents. The fire was roaring, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. People were chatting, laughing, holding cups of apple cider and plates of appetizers. Richard spotted me and waved me over. "Lucas, glad you made it." He raised his voice to address the room. "Everyone, can I have your attention for a minute?" The room quieted down, faces turning toward us. I felt suddenly self-conscious, not sure what was happening. "As most of you know," Richard began, "last year we had some challenges with our firewood supply and some disagreements about community guidelines. Through all of that, Lucas Anderson here stood his ground in a way that ultimately made our community stronger. He showed us that rules should serve people, not the other way around." There was a murmur of agreement through the room. "More than that," Richard continued, "Lucas has been quietly serving this community for years, providing the firewood that keeps this fireplace going and makes these gatherings possible. I wanted to take a moment to publicly thank him for that." The room erupted in applause. I felt my face getting hot, not used to this kind of attention. Several people came up to shake my hand and thank me personally. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. As the evening went on, I found myself actually enjoying the social. I talked with neighbors I had only waved to before, heard stories about the community's history, and felt more connected to Pine Ridge than I ever had. The fireplace crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth that went beyond just temperature. Later in the evening, I was standing by the fireplace, watching the flames when Marcus, the new board member, approached me. "You know," he said, "I moved here right in the middle of all that drama last fall. I kept hearing about the Great Firewood War, and I thought people were exaggerating. But being on the board now, reading through all the old meeting minutes and violation notices, I realize it was actually crazier than people said." "It definitely got out of hand," I agreed. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "it is a perfect case study in how HOAs can go wrong. I actually used it as an example in a nonprofit management workshop I taught last month. How organizational leaders can lose sight of their actual mission and start focusing on control rather than service. Did you mention the part where I got caught on camera checking for firewood theft?" I asked Riley. Marcus laughed. "That part especially. But seriously, you handled it well. You stood up for yourself without being vindictive. You withdrew your labor without trying to hurt anyone. And when Patricia finally apologized, you accepted it with grace. That is leadership, even if you were not trying to be a leader." I had never thought about it that way. To me, I had just been trying to protect my property and my peace of mind. But I supposed Marcus had a point. How you handle conflict says a lot about who you are. The winter season continued smoothly. I supplied firewood for every event, and the clubhouse was consistently packed. The community seemed happier, more relaxed. The board focused on actual issues like road maintenance and amenity improvements rather than nitpicking resident violations. In February, we had a major ice storm that knocked out power for most of Pine Ridge for 3 days. The clubhouse, which had a backup generator, became an emergency shelter. I spent those 3 days keeping the fireplace going around the clock, making sure everyone who needed warmth had a place to come. Jim helped me split and haul wood as we burned through cord after cord. It was exhausting but also deeply satisfying, knowing that my woodpile was serving such an important purpose. When the power came back on and life returned to normal, the experience had brought the community even closer together. People who had never spoken before had spent hours together in the clubhouse, sharing food and stories and body heat. The firewood that Patricia had once tried to fine me for had literally kept people safe during a crisis. As spring arrived again, I realized that an entire year had passed since the original violation notice. So much had changed. Patricia had moved out of Pine Ridge entirely, selling her house to a nice family with 2 kids. Richard was continuing to do an excellent job as HOA president, keeping things running smoothly without the drama. And I had somehow become a fixture in the community, not just as the firewood guy, but as someone people knew and respected. My tree service business was thriving too. I had hired 2 part-time employees and bought a new truck. The firewood operation had expanded beyond just supplying the clubhouse. I now had about 15 residential clients in Pine Ridge and several more in surrounding neighborhoods. What had started as a side project to save myself some money on heating had turned into a legitimate business. One evening in April, I was sitting on my porch when I got a call from Derek, my lawyer friend, who had helped me understand the HOA guidelines a year ago. "Lucas, remember when you first called me about that firewood violation?" he asked. "How could I forget?" I replied. "Well, I have been dealing with another HOA case, completely different neighborhood, but it has some similarities. Client got cited for a vegetable garden that supposedly violated aesthetic guidelines. I used your case as precedent in my argument, how rules need to be applied reasonably and in line with their stated purpose. We won." "That is great," I said. "The thing is," Derek continued, "I think your situation could be helpful to a lot of people dealing with overzealous HOAs. Would you be willing to let me write it up as a case study for a property law journal? I would change the names and location, obviously." I thought about it. If my experience could help someone else avoid the stress and frustration I had gone through, that seemed worthwhile. "Sure, go ahead. Appreciate it, man. You might be surprised how many people are going to benefit from you standing up to Patricia Jenkins and her measuring tape." That summer was peaceful. I worked, enjoyed the mountain weather, and prepared for the next winter season. I built a new storage shed specifically for firewood, designed to keep larger quantities properly organized and seasoned. The structure was attractive, functional, and well within all HOA guidelines, not that it mattered much anymore. The current board was focused on real issues, not hassling residents over minor aesthetic concerns. In August, I got an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia, postmarked from Charlotte. Inside was a brief note. "Lucas, I wanted you to know that I have been doing some thinking about my time in Pine Ridge. I let my desire for order turn into something controlling and hurtful. Your situation was the most obvious example, but you were not the only person I wronged. I am writing to several former neighbors to apologize. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong. I hope the community is thriving. Patricia." I read the note twice, surprised by the sincerity in it. People do not often acknowledge their mistakes so directly, especially someone like Patricia who had built her entire identity around being right. I wrote a brief reply, thanking her for the apology and wishing her well in Charlotte. It felt like the final closing of a difficult chapter. As September arrived and I started preparing for another winter season, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. A simple disagreement over firewood height had spiraled into conflict, theft, resignations, and ultimately positive change for the entire community. It was not how I would have chosen to spend a year of my life, but I could not deny that good things had come from it. The first Friday social of the new season was bigger than ever. The board had decided to make it a celebration of community, with everyone encouraged to bring a dish to share. I brought a massive pot of chili, figuring if I was going to participate, I might as well go all in. The clubhouse was transformed. Mary and several other residents had decorated it beautifully with fall colors. The fireplace was roaring, fueled by wood from my perfectly legal, properly stacked woodpile. Children ran around playing games while adults talked and laughed. It was the kind of scene you see in movies about small-town life, except this was real, and I was part of it. Jim found me by the fireplace, both of us holding plates of food. "This is nice," he said simply. "Yeah," I agreed. "It really is." "You think Patricia ever imagined it would turn out like this?" Jim asked. I watched the flames dance, thought about the past year, all the conflict and resolution and growth. Probably not. But then again, none of us did. Richard approached with a couple I did not recognize. "Lucas, I want you to meet David and Sarah Chen. They just bought the Henderson place." David, Sarah. This is Lucas Anderson, our resident firewood expert and the guy who stood up to the HOA and lived to tell the tale. David laughed and shook my hand. "We heard about that. It was actually reassuring to hear that the board is reasonable here. Our last HOA was a nightmare." "We have got it pretty good now," I said. "Took some work to get here, but it was worth it." As the evening continued, I found myself thinking about community and what it really means. It is not about everyone following the same rules or maintaining some artificial standard of perfection. It is about people coming together, supporting each other, and being willing to stand up when something is wrong, even if it is uncomfortable. My firewood had become a symbol of that. What Patricia had seen as a violation of order, I saw as preparation and self-sufficiency. What had started as a conflict became a catalyst for positive change. And now, that same firewood was keeping the community warm, both literally and figuratively. The winter passed like the previous one, with regular deliveries to the clubhouse and a growing list of residential clients. My business was stable, my relationships in the community were strong, and my woodpile stood tall and proud. Exactly as it should be in March, Richard called to tell me he would not be running for HOA president again. "It has been a good 2 years," he said, "but I need to focus more on my work and family. I think you should consider running." "Me?" I was genuinely shocked. "Richard, I am not a bored person. I just want to cut wood and mind my own business." "That is exactly why you would be good at it," Richard replied. "You understand the difference between necessary rules and unnecessary interference. The community trusts you. Think about it." I did think about it, long and hard. In the end, I decided not to run for president, but I did agree to join the board as a regular member. It felt like the right level of involvement, a way to give back without taking over my entire life. The annual meeting where we elected new positions was surprisingly drama-free. A woman named Angela Morrison was elected president, someone with experience in community organizing and a practical, no-nonsense attitude. I was elected to the board along with 2 other residents. Jim joked that I had gone from HOA enemy to HOA member in less than 2 years. "Character development," I replied with a grin. My first board meeting was enlightening. We discussed actual community needs like repaving the main entrance road, updating the playground equipment, and organizing a neighborhood watch program. Nobody mentioned firewood heights or measuring anyone's fence posts. It was what an HOA should be, focused on serving the community rather than controlling it. As my second year supplying firewood to the clubhouse came to a close, I realized that my whole perspective had shifted. I had moved to Pine Ridge looking for space and privacy, wanting mainly to be left alone. But through conflict and resolution, I had found something I had not been looking for but needed anyway: genuine connection to a community. The firewood had been the catalyst, but it was really about something much larger. It was about standing up for yourself while remaining open to others. It was about enforcing rules that mattered and letting go of ones that did not. It was about the difference between authority and leadership, between control and service. On a warm spring evening, I stood on my porch looking at my property. The woodpile from last year was nearly depleted, but I had already started building the next one. It stood about 7 feet tall, properly stacked and seasoned, behind my fence exactly where it should be. No violations, no drama, just good wood ready to keep people warm when the cold came again. My phone buzzed with a text from Mary. Confirmed dates for next season's events. Can you supply again? Same arrangement, I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. It would be my pleasure. Because it was my pleasure. Not just the income, though that was nice. Not just the satisfaction of providing a quality product, though I took pride in that too. It was being part of something, contributing in my own way, and knowing that when people gathered in that clubhouse with the fireplace roaring, I had a hand in making that warmth possible. I had learned that sometimes you have to stack your firewood high and stand your ground, even if it means conflict. But I had also learned that the goal is not to win battles, it is to build something better than what was there before. Patricia had tried to control the community and ended up losing her place in it. I had simply tried to protect what was mine and ended up finding connection I never expected. The mountains in the distance were turning purple in the fading light. Summer would be here soon, then fall, then another winter. The cycle would continue and I would be ready. My woodpile would stand tall, my chainsaw would stay sharp, and the clubhouse fireplace would burn warm and bright. And if anyone had a problem with that, well, we had a reasonable board now who understood the difference between rules that matter and rules that do not. That was worth more than any amount of firewood, though I was happy to provide that too.